And I would urge people, no matter what state you're in, when you sit down to do tax planning, make sure you think about the property tax aspect. The last big code change to the IRS code under Trump took away our ability to write off taxes we paid. So in the past, let's say your property was worth over $1 million, so you're paying maybe $12,000 a year in property taxes, right? The law had always been you don't pay tax on tax.
Welcome to the Plan B CRNA podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Jones, and I'm so excited that you're here. The Plan B CRNA podcast is the only show made specifically for nurse anesthetists who are exploring options outside of their traditional career paths. This is the place to expand your mind and your goals as we uncover new ways to produce side income together. Join me for some honest, unscripted discussions with other CRNAs who are transforming their financial lives. This episode is brought to you by On-Call Capital. On-Call Capital is dedicated to educating CRNAs and other healthcare providers about investing outside of the traditional stock market. On-Call Capital also provides opportunities for you, yes, you, to create passive income and generational wealth while also lowering your taxable income through investments in the apartment and alternative investment spaces. If you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure you do that right now so that you don't miss an episode. Thanks so much for joining me today. And now, on with the show. Welcome to another Provider Spotlight episode of the Plan B CRNA podcast. This is actually a special guest episode, and I thought that since we're getting close to tax time, why not have someone here who deals with these types of issues on a regular basis? So Lauren Cadilac is an attorney in Dallas, Texas, and she participates in all things real estate, which includes estate and tax planning. This is translated into her having a ton of Plan Bs herself. So I'm excited to talk with her about her various experiences. Let's just get to it. Lauren, it's great to have you here today.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And, just like I start any other conversation, I love to start at the beginning. So, most kids don't grow up saying, hey, I want to be a real estate attorney when I grow up. So what made you take this career path?
Well, I was not most kids, Bobby. I actually came into real estate kind of by way of two different merging goals. When I was 4, I decided I want to be the president of the United States of America. Okay. And I was
not uncommon.
Right. And so I began to read biographies about past presidents. And I very quickly noticed that all of them were lawyers. Right. W, I think, was our first ever MBA, and I was an adult by the time, he was elected. So every president had been a lawyer except George Washington, of course. Yeah. And so I was like, well, obviously then I must go to law school, right? If that's the way we get to the presidency. And then separately, at that time, around the time Bush was elected, I was a very young adult, but I was an adult nonetheless. I began working for a real estate agent. I was working on my associate's degree, and I basically ran errands for her. I would put out signs and put up new flyers in the box. And this is way before we had the MLS in our phone and all that kind of stuff, right? So I would have to go take this thing on the lockbox, and then I would have to go to a landline, and it would do this fax noise. And anyhow, I was like, this real estate is really quite interesting. And so I decided to go to real estate school to get my license. I knew I was going to be a lawyer, and I thought, well, that's not going to hurt. That might help me get accepted into a law school or whatever. And like I said, it's certainly not going to hurt. So when I was 19, I got licensed in the state of Arizona to sell real estate. And I did real estate sales during college. That's how I paid my bills in college, was as a realtor. And I would take my classes, Tuesday, Thursday, or Monday, Wednesday. And when I had classes, I would tell people I was in an appointment with another client. And because, nobody wants to know that you're working on yourself or doing something selfish, like getting an education. So, I'm with a client, the client here being someone I paid to teach me something, but whatever, details. So after I went to law school, and I actually came out and worked for AT&T for 5 years, doing contracts and contracts negotiations. So you would think that when I hung my plaque to start my own firm, that contracts would have been what came to me. But I guess, the universe and me loved real estate so much. It came to me almost right away. Immediately, I started getting real estate related legal questions. And I realized that real estate is kind of a place that not a lot of lawyers really want to practice. Most practices, you really just kind of learn a thing, right? And you can forget the rest of the law. You can just focus on your thing, right? Like criminal defense or family law, whatever. But a real estate lawyer, we have to know everything. Property law is the basis of the law, starting all the way back in England, right? And so every ex-British colony, our fundamental is property law. Not always real estate, but property, right? Whose earrings are these or whatever. And so that's my practice just kind of grew and flourished. And I saw that there was definitely a gap in the market, at least here in Dallas. There was a huge community that had never really been served. And other real estate attorneys were all downtown in the marble buildings, charging $600 an hour, And so I said, I'll put my office, where I have a view of downtown, not downtown, and where parking is free and where people can easily come see me. And I'll charge them a more reasonable rate, like $300 an hour, to help them with their real estate. And so that's how the firm kind of grew to be a real estate focus. And as much as I love looking at architecture and real estate, it's kind of like, well, duh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Well, and I appreciate that you mentioned that real estate is not just its own niche. Like it really has more of an all-encompassing nature to it. And that includes tax law,
absolutely. Right.
So,
yes.
That's something. So how did your educational process take you from real estate to tax law? How much of that did you get in school? How much did you get once you got out? How did that work?
So I'm a nerd, and while I was in law school, they offered federal income tax as a class. And even though it wasn't on the bar, when I was in law school, I had thought I would do estate planning. And I do estate planning as part of my practice. And we'll talk about some techniques folks can use to help protect their assets and their estate in a bit here. But because estate planning, in my mind, an estate plan is not just the documents for after your death, it's everything leading up to your death and then distributing things after your death, right? But what's important is while you're alive. And that's why an estate plan is so important. Medical power of attorney, how important that is. Everyone who's watching this knows how important that is. That's part of an estate plan, right? That has nothing to do with once I'm dead. It has everything to do with while I'm alive. So good estate planning thinks about tax and tax considerations. So that's why I took federal income tax in law school. And then I had always wanted to go get my LLM in taxation because I really like the code, and taxation is obviously just code. It's very IRC, right? Pick up the giant IRC code book and that's where all your answers are. So I will be completing my LLM in taxation 3 months from today. I'll be turning in my thesis paper. And so an LLM is like a master's degree of law.
Okay.
So it's like people who want to do something more specialized, like maritime law or something, you go get an LLM in that topic. And so I'm getting my LLM in taxation. I'm actually writing my thesis about property taxes in Texas. Property taxes are a huge piece of my business personally. Okay. And protesting values, that season starts for me in 21 days. I'm literally counting down. And really, people who are investing in real estate need to think about property taxes, right? Like, I feel like that's one of the things, property taxes and insurance are things like we don't really think about when we're sitting down crunching these numbers but property taxes can kill you. They can kill your deal. And personally, I'm in Texas. My taxes have been going up so much every year. It's smothering. It's like, how will my income ever keep up with the increase in property taxes. So I'm going to be writing my thesis about Texas property taxes. And I would urge people, no matter what state you're in, when you sit down to do tax planning, make sure you think about the property tax aspect. The last big code change to the IRS code under Trump took away our ability to write off taxes we paid. So in the past, let's say your property was worth over $1 million, so you're paying maybe $12,000 a year in property taxes, right? The law had always been you don't pay tax on tax. That's why we can deduct our sales tax every year. I pay like $1,000 on average in sales tax, so I put that on a line item and it's deducted. You're not taxed on tax, except under Trump's code. Now the cap is $10,000 on property taxes. So if you own a property that in Texas is a 2%, 2 to 2.5% property tax rate, so you're looking at like a $600,000 to $700,000 property, which is relatively average for people in our income brackets, right?
Yeah.
Now I can't write off above $10,000 of the taxes, so now I'm paying tax on tax. And that is a huge reason, property tax planning is just important as end of year tax planning and end of life tax planning.
Yeah. Well, I love that you brought that up because the world of tax law is always changing. And that's something that I'm sure in your time as an attorney, you've seen many, many changes along the way. So how has your practice been impacted by some of those changes? What are the things that stick out to you?
Well, the biggest change I think in the tax code was the $10,000 cap in my practice. There were other large changes that affected me as a business owner, right? Like I used to buy lunches for my staff quite a bit, especially if we had some kind of case we're working on a lot of billables and we're really pounding it out. And then the tax code changed and I could only deduct 50% of that expense, right?
Okay.
Yeah, but then during COVID, they bumped it to 100 temporarily. So last year you could deduct 100. So we went back to paying for meals, right? But when they bumped it down to 50, I as a business owner can't afford to pay taxes on 50% of a meal I provide to someone. So I can't be buying meals. The code changes aside from the tax on tax that we just talked about. That was what affected my practice. The rest affected me as a business owner. I ended up paying much higher taxes because of Trump's changes.
Yeah. Well, and that's interesting because in healthcare, I mean, we got used to, having these sales reps that would come in and they'd provide, these grandiose meals and, try to persuade you to use certain drugs or devices and things like that. And that really started to kind of go by the wayside during my practice. And it just, you didn't have that happen as often, or they'd come in and it was a cheaper meal or a cheaper kind of thing, and so that's something that I think, healthcare providers can specifically relate to that, hey, we used to have the good life. We used to have all these meals that were compensated and all this stuff. So it made up for some of the hard hours that you had to work. But, then you're not having that as much. And mainly that's because of, these reps coming in and they're worried about influence, and that makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. Because you don't want people coming in to buy you and, have you kind of start using their products with, that kind of influence. So I get that. But, as far as, the tax implications of that, it's understandable to where these companies are seeing now, oh, well, we can't quite do that as much anymore. So now I do want to kind of get into your practice individually, because, you mentioned, hey, I'm out of downtown Dallas. We see the downtown, we're not in it. So what's the kind of profile of the most common clientele that you deal with on a day-to-day basis?
So I have kind of two profiles, right? I have the client I love to work with and develop and those kind of things. And then I have the client that I'm really helping. I'm helping the one I love to work with, but I'm helping them in a different way. That's kind of more of a growth. We'll talk about that in a second. Gotcha. So the ones I'm really helping, and I actually have a contract with the city of Dallas to do legal work on certain real estate when there are certain title issues, right? It's a narrow thing, but the city of Dallas and my firm have a contract. So those clients are typically, they're minorities, people of color. They're typically baby boomers. They're one of several siblings. And most of the time there's a piece of property at issue, right? Like a house that their mom had paid off and earned or whatever. Maybe it's 2 or 3 small properties that they're just trying to figure out, how do we get this into our names? What do we do? So that is this, like, I was born to serve. I love to help people. I love to win for people. I love to win. And when I can win for someone else, it's even better, right? Because now we both won. And I love that. That's why I'm a lawyer. So that's the service, that's like the ministry of my practice, so to speak. I love working with people like you, Bobby, and probably your listeners who have an education probably like mine, right? Like we went to a ton of school. We do pretty well for ourselves now, or maybe even trade. I have a great client who is an electrician. I consider a law practice a trade, right? So I'm like a plumber, electrician. I'm practicing a trade. A doctor is practicing a trade too, right? It's just that we had to borrow a lot of money to get to this trade versus getting to do an apprenticeship or something.
Well, I love that you mentioned that, because it's, like there's obviously a difference between electrician's training and nursing training, but really there's not. You have to go and get into the field and do the things that you're wanting to learn. And at the end of the day, some of the job prospects are pretty similar.
And it's a trade, right? It's a trade.
Exactly.
It's a skill set that you acquire. And it's not like I'm a customer service representative. That's not a trade. I didn't have to acquire a skill set. But people in all professionals, CPAs, electricians, plumbers, every single one of us is a tradesperson, period. And I find that folks who are tradespeople tend to be relatively entrepreneurial in spirit. And that's why I enjoy working with them so much, right? My tradespeople clients either own a business that touches real estate, like an electrician, like a plumber, or they invest in real estate. And I work with a ton of investors. Some of them have a small business, they do investing, What I love about working with people like that is that I can watch them grow. Like we grow together in a way, right? And I learn so much from them. I've learned so much about real estate investing from my clients that actually do it. So much more than anyone could ever learn at any seminar, right? Because they're actually doing it. And then they come to me when they run into problems. So now I know what problems to look out for, for myself and other clients when I go to do investing. So those are kind of my growth clients, the people that, I'm a single mother growing a business. Most of them are parents, single or not, but most of them have families. They're growing a business. We are trying to make something for our children, some kind of legacy. And I love being able to contribute to that. So.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of that, one of the things that I've often said is, it's not about how much you make, but what you get to keep. And so, I want to get into a little bit of the nitty gritty here. What are some of the most common mistakes that, people are making either as, professionals or real estate investors that it's eating into their ability to keep more of those returns, more of their income?
I would say structure. Corporate structure, so to speak. So folks who, let's use the example of a real estate investor. There are many people who go buy real estate and, especially at first, you have to get loans in your own name because you have credit, right? And so they'll leave the house in their name and then go rent it out to someone. All right, well, now when that someone has some kind of injury or some terrible thing happens and they come to sue you, guess what? Guess who they're suing? You personally, you. Guess what that means? They can take your things, your jacket off your back. Okay. Right. Like your personal. So anyone who is doing any sort of investing in their own name, especially as it pertains to real estate, or I'm not talking Bitcoin. Nobody's going to slip and break their leg Bitcoin mining. Okay. That's not, I'm talking about where a real true liability could occur, right?
Yeah,
You own a piece of real estate, you rent out a piece of real estate, you have a vacant lot. Even a vacant lot can bring up a liability for you personally if kids go around and play on it, whatever, right? And it's not even like about the judgment. And the vacant lot, kids playing on it, you might not get a judgment against you, right? That might be a relatively frivolous lawsuit. But guess what? You had to go pay a lawyer, you had to do this, you had to do that, and your personal stuff was at risk because you didn't have an LLC. Also, having an LLC or a corporation or the appropriate structure in place helps with taxation, right? You are taxed as the structure, so you can take better deductions for expenses. You can take, in the case of someone, let's say, that has a full-time job in the medical industry, right? They're 9 to 5, they're W-2, but they have, I don't know, they have a rental property. All right. That's an investment. Okay. So, with your W-2, you're not going to be able to deduct things like home office. You're not going to be able to deduct things like part of your internet bill at home or your cell phone or any of those things. But if you establish that LLC and then the LLC owns the real estate, right? So you have or in a corporation, you want to talk to a lawyer about and a CPA about what's going to work best for you, right? But if you establish that LLC or corporation, now all of a sudden, I'm managing my rental from this space in my home. I'm deducting part of the cost of my home. I'm deducting part of my literally everyday expenses, like things I'm going to be paying for anyhow, I'm now using for my business, and a portion of them are deductible. That is going to save you so much money. You also want to make sure you have a good CPA because depreciation is the best thing in the entire world. Depreciation can make it so that you owe nothing when you should owe a lot. So you want to make sure that you have a structure in place, as well as, people to give you guidance as to how that structure should look and what the best choices are so that you can save the most money.
Well, and that leads me to my next couple of questions. So I love that you mentioned that. Finding a good CPA. How the heck do you do that? Like people, I see it on forums all the time. Oh, who's got a good CPA in this area or that area? Who has a CPA who works good with real estate or with, being a CRNA who's in business for themselves? How in the world, like we're healthcare professionals. I don't know how to vet a CPA. I don't know how to make sure they're doing the things that they're supposed to do because that's not my profession.
Right.
So how in the world do you go about finding a good CPA and knowing that they're doing the right things for you?
Well, let me just say it's not my profession either, right?
Yes, absolutely.
The tax code, and I'm a tax attorney. But so that makes, for me, finding a good CPA particularly hard. I think first we need to define good.
Yes.
I have this issue where every CPA I've ever talked to has no sense of humor whatsoever. I like to crack jokes. If you don't at least giggle at some of my jokes, I know we are not going to work well together. Okay. Like there's that. So a lot of CPAs lack humor, and that has been really difficult for me. I had, to find someone who actually has a sense of humor. My other issue is lawyers. We like to hang out here. This is the gray zone, right? Black, white, gray. They have rules, but let's see how to follow them without following them, right? I'm an attorney. I'm going to argue a lot. The majority of CPAs are very black and white. This is what the code says. I'm not going to play. And they're not willing to play in the gray. So it's particularly hard for someone like me who wants to be in the gray sandbox at all times to interact with the CPA who's trying to be, in a totally different box. Now, what I did personally is I reached out to some that I found on LinkedIn or who had reached out to me on LinkedIn, which I think is, if your listeners are not on LinkedIn to network in the real estate or whatever investing they want to do, they're doing themselves a disservice. It is free. Just put your name out there, you look up a keyword and you'll start to find people posting about things and you'll create an actual network. So I have actually 2 CPAs. So I have a CPA who I have do my bookkeeping. I have a bookkeeper, she does it. Then the CPA does it professionally, make sure my bookkeeper did it correctly, you know, changes where there are mistakes and so on. And then I have another CPA who files the taxes. So he's able to see if the bookkeeping CPA did all of her stuff right. I can't do that. I can't edit mathematics. Okay, I don't do math. If I did math, I'd be a doctor. So I can't go back and know if their work is right. So that's why I have these extra levels, right? So I can make sure. Some of your viewers, I'm sure, are freaking great at math, you know, and in that case, then cool, you know, have them check your work. You'll be fine. But I would just suggest interview people. I interviewed about 4 or 5 different CPAs. If they want your business, they'll sit down and do an interview with you. They might charge you a little bit for their time, you know, for a consultation, and that's worthwhile if they're going to provide an excellent service. And really, in my opinion, the whole reason to have a CPA, besides, you know, making sure you get all of the appropriate deductions, is so that if you get audited, you can call them and be like, bro, you got a problem. I don't have that problem, right? Like, I handed you everything, so you got to deal with the audit. And I like the idea of having someone who understands math to be able to explain that to the IRS on my behalf.
No, and that makes a ton of sense. So, and speaking of protecting yourself, and, you know, I want to get into that bit of asset protection. How can people set themselves up so that their, you know, their assets are protected more so than they are right now?
Okay. So I do want to disclose before I get into this, a lot of these things are very state specific. Business structure and business entities are not state specific, but there are state specific rules. The advice I'm about to give you is the best Texas advice. If you're listening in Minnesota, you need to talk to a Minnesota attorney and see if this advice works for you. Okay. So I'm just giving you some ideas. This is not legal guidance. You're not in Texas, so you got to go talk to a lawyer in your state to make sure that this will work for you.
Exactly.
So what I do with 100% of my real estate investors, I create a trust. Okay. In the trust, we will have their homestead. We will have all of their assets. We will have their LLCs and their businesses. The reason I do that is because when you pass away, or let's say just are debilitated, I was in a 4-day coma once, right? So like that 4 days, I didn't make any decisions for myself. And if some business items had come up, someone would have need to step in my shoes. Well, when you have your assets held in a trust like this, the trustee steps into your shoes, and you don't need the government, AKA a judge, appointing someone or telling what they can and can't do. It's all written in your trust. All your directions are here, right? And so is the trustee.
So how is that different from having beneficiaries?
So the beneficiaries receive the benefit of the trust. They're not necessarily the trustee.
They're not the decision makers, is what you're saying.
Not necessarily, right?
Gotcha.
The trustee is the decision maker. So in my own case, I have a trust. I am the trustee. Right? I'm alive and I can make my own decisions. I'm fine. And it's my stuff. So I want to manage it. But, you know, if I go into another coma or, you know, I pass away, my trustee that's listed to take over for me in the trust literally steps into my shoes. And all they have to do is go show the trust to the bank, which the bank already has on file, but take the trust and your ID, like, hey, here I am. Okay. The reason this is particularly important with like investments, let's say you're doing residential rentals, okay? Even if it's an LLC, well, if the LLC nominates someone to step in your shoes, the LLC's business can continue. But if you have your properties in your own name and you die, no one can collect your rent until the judge appoints someone in a probate matter. Here in Dallas, that will take a short eternity. I know in Michigan, it takes like 2 weeks. So again, that's why I say talk to an attorney in your state to know if a trust is really going to work for you. In Texas, or in Dallas in particular, a trust is pretty much the only way to go because it eliminates the court, any need for court intervention with your stuff. So once I set up the trust, then I set up what's called a series LLC. Have you heard of those?
I have. I'm not the most familiar with it though.
Okay, I had like just drawn them the other day for someone, but I don't see my drawing. So I'm gonna draw one for you. Do you mind?
That's perfect. The people
Okay,
on
just so
YouTube
you
can
know.
enjoy this, and the people who are listening should just go to YouTube and check this out.
Okay, I just want to also full disclosure, I am not an artist. I am an attorney.
That's okay.
There is no judgment allowed here, okay?
Nope, none at all.
Okay. All right. So I'm gonna draw two examples.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's say you follow my lead and
Mhm.
oh, can we see it?
Yeah, maybe,
I have to
maybe.
shut off my background. Hold on. Okay.
Hey, now we're there.
There
Okay.
we go. Okay. So here's me in my homestead in my trust. Okay.
Mhm.
Now my trust is going to own my LLC. Okay. Now in this scenario, I own 3 properties in my LLC.
Mhm.
In this scenario, I break my leg in or not me because I'm the owner. You break your leg in property B. Okay. You sue the crap out of me and you get a money judgment. Well, you've only got the money judgment against the LLC. You didn't sue me because I have a corporate veil that the LLC created, and I have this extra element of a trust that owns my stuff. So you'd have to sue my trust, and good luck with that. So you sued my LLC, you get this money judgment. I got injured, or you got injured here in B, right? Now, when you go to collect this money judgment, you can go for any of the properties in my LLC. If your money judgment is for 300,000 and each of these is worth 100,000, you now own my 3 properties.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me show you why I like a series LLC. All right. Again, not great art here.
Yeah.
So now the trust owns this series LLC. But you see, there's a line between each property.
So it protects each asset.
Yes. So each property will be considered a separate legal entity. The trust will have an EIN. The series LLC will have an EIN, and each property will have its own EIN.
Really? Okay.
Okay, so you have to do the accounting separately for each property. That's the key to a series.
Okay.
Now I break my leg in B, or you break your leg because I own these.
Yeah.
Look what B is in. It is in a box. You can't get to A or C because they're not in the same entity. They're in series. You can only get what's in series B. That's it.
Yeah.
That's
well, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you know, and it does seem unfair that somebody who hurts themselves in one of your properties would then have access to sue you for multiple properties or multiple properties value.
Well, they're suing the entity, and they can get a judgment against the entity, and the judgment, they can take everything from the entity to fulfill the judgment. So that's why the series is so great, because the only thing in that entity is the one item.
Which, again, you know, depending on the value of the property, that can discourage people from actually moving forward, right, with some of those judgments. You know, they don't want to take it to court because there's not enough worth, you know, their time and effort. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I would love to, I'm going to put a link in the show notes to give some more information about series LLCs, just for people who want to check that out. But yeah, I do want to you know, get back to the idea of people kind of getting started down this journey for passive investment and passive income. You know, we mentioned at the top that you've got a lot of your own plan Bs. Would you mind sharing some of those with the audience and letting us know, like, how in the world do people who are healthcare professionals by day get started on some of these things, you know, in their own time and get started on their own passive income journeys?
So I have a plan B through Z. Then I have sub letters after that. I have many plans. There's many backups. Personally, I think the best way to start investing in real estate, I believe, is to buy a duplex when you're young and live in one half and rent out the other.
A little bit of house hacking.
You're going to have an asset. They're going to be paying your mortgage for it. You get your feet wet. You get the experience. You know, you build the credit. You do those kind of things. Even if you're a well-established medical professional and you're in a home and you have kids, you're not moving to a little duplex or whatever, I still suggest looking for that type of income opportunity. Personally, my home had a garage apartment. And when I bought it, the garage apartment was in disrepair. So I fixed up the garage apartment and I used that as an Airbnb rental. And that pays for my children's private school. So yes, which is great. As a single mother, I wouldn't be able to send them to private school, but I have someone, you know, really helping pay my mortgage quite a bit. In my own house, it is set up such that it's kind of two different structures. So I'm splitting it and soon making it into a duplex in which I will rent out both sides and the guest house. So I think personally, for me, starting small has been the key. And starting small meant, you know, at my own home, right? Like I have to have a house and I'm going to have a mortgage, right? So might as well buy a house where I can do something to the property such that it will make me income. And I got to be honest, no matter where I live, ever since I've had that, I will not buy property where I'm not going to be able to make income off of it, period. There's like, it's too easy to make income off of your home, especially in Texas. We can do things like buy a couple acres and put some goats on it and get an agriculture exemption, you know, that is making money off of the property because I've now got goats that I can sell for people to eat or something. Or I don't know, goats. They mow my lawn for me and I got an ag exemption so I don't pay taxes, property taxes.
Well, and I love that you mentioned that because it's not all about like, hey, you have to have a property that you can have an Airbnb out of.
Correct.
You know, and I have an uncle who, you know, he bought a piece of property that was on a lake in Florida, and it was an old orange grove. And so they got this farmer's exemption for a period of time until, you know, finally somebody came out and said, hey, well, you know what, these trees are kind of dying and you're not actually doing anything with this property. So in that case, they took all those trees out and they put in blueberry bushes. And so now they have a blueberry farm. And so that property is worth a lot more and they get a ton of tax savings for having a blueberry farm on their property. Bingo. And now they have lakefront property. It's a gorgeous piece of property and they have this farmer's exemption. So.
And the income. So, I mean, I learned relatively recently, it was like in the last 2 years, people will pay money. You know, if you can go find a piece of land in a rural area where there's already a barn or some kind of structure to hold horses, you don't even have to hire someone to take care of them. People will pay money just to keep their horses on there and they'll take care of their own horses. They'll just give they'll pay what it costs to own the land essentially to have a horse storage. Yeah. And you don't have to do anything with the horse. You don't have to feed it. You don't have to maintain it. It's just really a storage facility for their animal. That's such a great way to make money. If your lot's big enough and you have enough animals and that kind of thing, you might get a farming or an ag exemption. Yeah. Which is awesome. So now you're making income without paying property taxes. You're going to pay income taxes, but if you've set up the right structure, you're going to make deductions for keeping up the property and so on and so forth. And now you're going to have this income, which you can get as close to tax-free as humanly possible in the United States.
Yeah. Well, and real estate in general is just inherently a tax advantage asset, and it's a flexible asset that people can use as a part of their portfolio to start to either, defer some of their other income gains or, some of their other asset values. And like you mentioned, protect those assets in certain ways that people don't always think about. So I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I know that there are a ton of, other questions that we could get into and ask, but I want to go ahead and start to wrap things up here, but I want to give people a chance to get a hold of you. How can they do that?
So I am Lauren Cadilac, and my firm is called Cadilac Law. We're based in Dallas, Texas. So I'm a Texas lawyer. I can help you with anything in Texas, and I can help you with tax planning, federal income tax planning. We can be reached by phone at 972-845-1200. Our website is cadillaclaw.net, and I spell Cadillac with one L. So it's CADILACLAW.net. And we also have a YouTube, and Bobby, I think you could do some links to my to my series LLC videos.
Certainly.
And that is under Cadillac Law as well. That is a wealth of knowledge. Even if you're a real estate investor in other states, it is a great play. I have a playlist just for investors to learn about title and real estate issues in law. And it's a great place to just kind of you're not going to walk out a lawyer after watching my videos, but you're going to have like an understanding and be able to have an intelligent conversation.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your time today. This has been such a, there's so much information that you've shared today, and I really appreciate your time. Anybody who is listening, please reach out to Lauren about any of your questions about estate planning and asset protection. And thanks for being here today.
Thanks so much for having me. And I look forward to helping anyone who gives us a call. And I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I had a ton of fun with this discussion. Lauren has such a unique story, and she truly cares about the clients she serves. When you talk with people who have a different background, you end up learning a couple of things along the way. First, we're not all that different from lawyers after all. They're highly educated. We're highly educated. And of course, it's a bit of a joke, of course, but not because it's untrue. Like most folks, Lauren is trying to build a legacy that lasts for her children. Like most folks, she's not a big fan of taxes. So even the most basic setup for an LLC helps you to begin to deduct those everyday expenses like internet, cell phone, travel, and the like. This lowers your taxable income, and all it takes is setting up your own LLC for some random 1099 gig and a little bit of work on the side. Then you're good to go. Secondly, hey, you know what? That person has some pretty cool perspectives. Her thoughts on depreciation are exactly what I try to get across to the investors that I serve. Namely, that depreciation in real estate can help you offset a ton of passive income, such that you don't end up paying taxes on the capital gains that you earn. Like in basketball, this doesn't always show up in the stat sheet, but it can have a major impact on your investments over time. Okay, I'm going to jump on the soapbox for a moment. So many people invest in a Roth IRA because the investments grow tax-free, and that's fantastic. But why wouldn't you invest in multifamily syndications for the same reason? These are investments that generally have a 5 to 7 year hold period and give you many of the same tax advantages in that you can largely avoid capital gains taxes. After the property sells, you can then just 1031 exchange into another property while deferring those capital gains. I have several investors who have expressed concern about locking up their money in an investment for a few years. The nice part of me says, yes, these are pretty illiquid investments for a few years, but I also just want to scream sometimes. You are completely willing to put your money into retirement accounts for 20 to 30 years before you touch them. But a 5 to 7 year hold period for even better, safer returns is too illiquid for you? What gives? But the answer is that it requires a bit of a mindset shift to start looking at things from this perspective. Luckily, there are CPAs and attorneys like Lauren who can help you truly break out of this type of thinking. If you do what everyone else does, you'll end up where everyone else does. I don't know about you, but that's not necessarily what I signed up for. Another point that Lauren mentioned is crucial. Your corporate structure is a huge component in how you protect your investments and side income from real estate. The main thing is that you need to be working alongside your CPA to maintain tax advantage status. This doesn't mean a single conversation when you get all of your tax stuff together and you send it over to them. This means communicating throughout the year with your tax professional to make sure that you're taking the right steps to protect yourself. Tax time is all year round, not just in April. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's show. If you enjoyed this discussion, please take a moment to hit subscribe and give us a 5-star review. Thanks so much for listening. And as always, stay safe and take care of each other out there. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Plan B CRNA podcast. If you haven't already subscribed and reviewed the show, I'd be honored if you took the extra time. It really helps to expand our reach and get the word out about the show. If you're a CRNA who is interested in sharing your story on our podcast, I'd love to have you. Please email me at bobby@oncallinvestments.com for more information. This episode was brought to you by On-Call Capital. They are dedicated to helping providers like you develop passive income and generational wealth through investments in the apartment and alternative investment spaces. Feel free to check out their website at www.oncallinvestments.com and subscribe to their free educational email series. You can find On-Call Capital on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also check out our YouTube page, where you'll find all of the show episodes along with other educational videos. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.